I spent 36 years believing I was the problem child, the clumsy one, the dramatic one, the daughter who drove my father away. My older half-sister Lindsay was the golden child. I was just the shadow she cast. On my 36th birthday, surrounded by family, at a restaurant, I leaned forward to blow out my candles. That's when Lindsay grabbed the cake with both hands and slammed it into my face so hard my head snapped backward. I heard the crack before I felt it my skull hitting the table edge. Then came the warmth spreading through my hair, blood mixing with vanilla frosting, the room spinning while everyone laughed. Through blurred vision, I caught Lindsay's expression before she rearranged it into fake concern. She was smiling. "It was just a joke," Mom said. "Stop being dramatic." But the next morning at the ER, when Dr. Matthews studied my x-rays, his face went pale. He didn't just find one fracture. He found years of them injuries I never knew I had. Then he picked up the phone and called the police. What those x-rays revealed had been buried for 31 years. Have you ever discovered that the person you trusted most was the one destroying you all along? My name is Kelly Hughes. I'm 36 years old, a financial analyst who spent a decade saving every penny to buy my own home without anyone's help. I thought independence would earn my family's respect. I was wrong. The headache that night was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Every heartbeat sent waves of pain through my skull, but something held me back from calling for help. Maybe it was the same instinct that had kept me quiet for 36 years, the deeply ingrained belief that my pain wasn't important enough to make a fuss about. Our family structure was complicated, though no one ever talked about it openly. Mom had Lindsay from her first marriage to a man named Robert, who died in a car accident when Lindsay was just 1 year old. 2 years later, Mom married my father, Michael. I was born when Lindsay was 2.5, but Michael left when I was 5 years old, and no one ever explained why. I just woke up one morning, and he was gone. Mom remarried Dan a few years later, a kind but passive man, who learned quickly that disagreeing with my mother meant days of icy silence. I learned that lesson too. In our family, keeping quiet meant keeping peace. I remember once overhearing Mom talking to a friend in the kitchen. "Kelly's father left because she was such a difficult baby," she said. "Lindsay was perfect. It was Kelly who drove him away." I was 11 years old, hiding around the corner, and those words burned themselves into my memory like a brand. I stopped questioning why Lindsay was the favorite after that. Some children are simply loved more. That's just how families work. Lindsay was the sun around which everyone orbited. Mom had financially supported her through 3 failed business ventures without a single word of criticism. Lindsay received praise for achievements that would have been ignored if I'd accomplished them. When she walked into a room, Mom's face lit up. When I entered, something in Mom's eyes dimmed just slightly. I'd noticed it for years, but trained myself not to care. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts drifted to Aunt Patricia, Mom's younger sister. She'd been at the restaurant, sitting in the corner as always. Quiet, watchful, somehow smaller than everyone else. I'd always felt a strange kinship with her, though we rarely exchanged more than polite greetings. We were both women who had learned to make ourselves invisible in this family. I once asked Grandma Eleanor why Patricia was so timid. Grandma's face had darkened. "Your mother broke something in Patricia a long time ago," she said. "Some wounds never heal when they come from family." I never asked again. Grandma Eleanor, the only person who ever loved me without conditions. She passed 3 years ago, leaving me a small wooden box with a handwritten card. "Only open when you truly need to, my sweet girl. You'll know when." I'd never opened it, assuming it contained old jewelry or photographs. The box sat in my closet gathering dust, but I remembered something strange from Grandma's funeral. Lindsay had been arguing with Grandma's lawyer in the hallway, her face red with fury. When she caught me watching, she immediately smiled and said she was just asking about the memorial service. I believed her then. I also remembered a notice I'd received from a bank about an escrow account related to some property I didn't recognize. I'd assumed it was a mistake and filed it away. Strange memories began surfacing as the pain pulsed through my head. The staircase fall 3 years ago right after the funeral, the parking lot incident, the barbecue where I'd tripped. In each memory, Lindsay was there, watching, always the first to say, "Kelly's always been so clumsy." My eyes found Grandma's box on my shelf. Only open when you truly need to. Something felt terribly wrong, not just in my body, but in the pattern of my entire life. Had Grandma known something I didn't? The next morning I could barely see straight. The headache had transformed into something monstrous overnight, and my vision kept splitting into doubles. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I drove myself to the emergency room, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, pulling over twice when the world started spinning too fast. The ER took me back quickly once I mentioned the head injury. A nurse checked my vitals while asking routine questions about when the injury occurred and how it happened. I gave her the simple version: fell at a birthday dinner, hit my head on a table. She made notes and told me the doctor would be in shortly. Doctor Matthews was a tall man in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He examined the wound on the back of my head carefully, then ordered x-rays and a CT scan. I lay still in the cold imaging room, listening to the machine hum around me, trying not to think about the medical bills or what Lindsay would say about me making a big deal out of nothing. When Dr. Matthews came back into my examination room, something in his expression had changed. The professional pleasantness was gone, replaced by something much more serious. He pulled up several images on the computer screen and turned it so I could see. Ms. Hughes, you have a hairline skull fracture from the impact last night. It's painful, but should heal with proper rest. He paused, and I could tell there was more. However, that's not what concerns me most. He pointed to my chest x-ray. This is an old rib fracture that healed improperly without medical treatment. Based on the calcification, I'd estimate this injury is approximately 3 years old. 3 years ago. The staircase fall right after Grandma's funeral. I remembered the weeks of pain that followed, how it hurt to breathe deeply. Lindsay had brought me ice packs and told me I was overreacting, that it was just a bruise. But Dr. Matthews wasn't finished. He moved to another image. This is an old hairline fracture in your collarbone, maybe 4 or 5 years old. The parking lot incident. I'd slipped on ice or so, I thought. Lindsay had been right behind me. And this, he pointed to my wrist, shows signs of repeated stress injuries. These patterns are consistent with defensive wounds, Ms. Hughes, the kind we see when someone repeatedly tries to protect themselves from impact. I stared at the x-rays like I was looking at a map of my own life, a life marked by injuries I was never allowed to acknowledge. Injuries I was always told were my own fault, because I was clumsy, dramatic, attention-seeking. Your body has been keeping records, Dr. Matthews said quietly, even when your mind was told to forget. He left the room to review my CT scan, and when he returned, his expression was even graver than before. He sat down across from me, which somehow made everything feel more serious. Ms. Hughes, I need you to understand how dangerous your current injury is. Your skull fracture is less than 1 centimeter from a major artery. He let that sink in. If you had fallen slightly harder, or if you had waited a few more hours to come in, we might be having a very different conversation right now. He paused. Or no conversation at all. 1 centimeter. That was the distance between a birthday accident and my funeral. I felt the blood drain from my face. Whoever caused this injury, Dr. Matthews continued, whether intentionally or not, put your life in real danger. Combined with the pattern of old injuries I'm seeing on your x-rays, I'm legally required to report this to the authorities. This isn't about accusing anyone. It's about ensuring your safety and documenting evidence. A detective arrived within the hour. She was a calm woman who looked to be in her early 50s, with short gray hair and steady brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. She introduced herself as Detective Morrison and pulled a chair close to my bed. Her questions were careful and specific. Who was present at the birthday dinner? Who poured my drinks that night? Who was present when I fell down the stairs 3 years ago? Who discouraged me from seeing a doctor afterward? Who was always the first to suggest I was overreacting? Each answer pointed to the same person. Lindsay poured my wine. Lindsay was behind me on the stairs. Lindsay brought me ice packs instead of driving me to urgent care. Lindsay always told me I was being dramatic. But that couldn't be right. Lindsay was difficult, yes. Competitive, sometimes cruel in the way older sisters could be cruel, but she wouldn't actually try to hurt me. She was my sister, half-sister technically, but still family. Family didn't do that to each other, did they? I was still processing everything when the door burst open. Mom came in first, her face tight with barely controlled fury. Dan followed behind her, looking uncomfortable and out of place. And then Lindsay, her eyes red-rimmed mascara running down her cheeks in perfect streaks of distress. "Oh my God, Kelly," Lindsay cried, rushing toward my bed. "I've been so worried about you. I can't believe this is happening. It was just a joke, you know that, right? We've always played rough. Remember when we were kids?" Before I could respond, she turned to Detective Morrison with wounded eyes. "I can't believe she's doing this to me. She's just trying to get attention like she always does." Mom stepped forward, positioning herself between me and the detective. "I don't know what my daughter has told you, but this is a family matter. Kelly has always been prone to dramatics. She's been jealous of her sister since they were children. Whatever she's claiming happened, I can assure you it was an accident." "Mom," I started, but she cut me off with a look that had silenced me since childhood. "Tell them, Kelly. Tell them right now that this was an accident and you want to drop whatever ridiculous complaint you've made. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family, to your sister's reputation?" Dan stood behind them both, his discomfort visible in every line of his body, but his mouth stayed firmly closed. He'd learned long ago not to contradict my mother. We all had. The pattern of 36 years played out in that sterile hospital room. Kelly is wrong. Kelly is dramatic. Kelly is jealous. Lindsay is innocent. Anyone who questions this is the enemy. I could see Detective Morrison's eyes moving between my mother, my sister, and me. She was taking mental notes about everything she was witnessing. Then a quiet voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" Everyone turned. Aunt Patricia had risen from a chair in the corner, a chair I hadn't even noticed she was sitting in. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with a determination I had never seen before. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I've been quiet for 30 years. I watched and said nothing because I was afraid. Afraid of my own sister, afraid of being cut off from the only family I have. But I can't do it anymore. Not after last night. Not after seeing Kelly on that floor with blood on her face while everyone laughed." "Patricia," my mother warned, her voice like ice. "Don't you dare." But Patricia wasn't looking at her sister. She was looking directly at Detective Morrison. "I have information relevant to this case. Things I've witnessed over the years. Things I should have reported a long time ago." Then she turned to me, tears streaming down her lined face. "Your grandmother left you something important, Kelly. A box. You need to open it tonight. Eleanor knew. She saw what I saw, and she spent her last years gathering evidence because she knew no one would believe her." Patricia gripped my hand, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "What happened at your birthday wasn't an accident. It wasn't even the first time, and it won't be the last unless you stop it now. Open the box, Kelly. They'll have to believe documents. They'll have to believe proof." Patricia drove me home from the hospital that evening. The doctors had discharged me with strict instructions for concussion care, a prescription for pain medication, and orders to rest. But rest was impossible. Patricia's words echoed in my mind the entire drive home. "Open the box. They'll have to believe documents. They'll have to believe proof." My hands were shaking as I unlocked my front door. Patricia followed me inside without a word. I led her to my bedroom closet where Grandma's wooden box had sat untouched for 3 years. The wood was dusty, the small brass latch tarnished with age. I carried it to my kitchen table and sat down, Patricia taking the chair across from me. I lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside, I found 4 items that would reshape everything I thought I understood about my family and my life. The first was a legal document several pages thick with an official seal. I read the heading 3 times before the words made sense. Transfer on death deed, dated 5 years ago. The document showed that Grandma Eleanor had legally transferred her beautiful Victorian house to me while she was still alive and of sound mind. The transfer was already complete, no probate required. I had legally owned that house for 3 years without knowing it. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The second item answered part of my question. It was a document explaining that mysterious escrow account I'd received a notice about years ago. Grandma had set up an automatic payment system to cover property taxes for 5 years after her death. An attached note in her handwriting read, "I knew you might not discover this right away, my sweet girl. I didn't want you to lose the house because of taxes while you were still figuring things out." The third item was an old photograph faded with age. I recognized Grandma immediately younger than I remembered her holding a baby tightly against her chest. The baby was me, maybe 6 months old. Grandma's arms were wrapped around me protectively, almost defensively. Behind us, barely visible at the edge of the frame, stood 2.5-year-old Lindsay. I brought the photograph closer to my eyes, studying my half-sister's face. The expression there made my blood run cold. It wasn't the normal jealousy of a toddler with a new sibling. It was something darker, something that didn't belong on any child's face. The fourth item was a letter in Grandma's careful handwriting. My throat tightened as I began to read. My sweet Kelly, if you're reading this, you finally needed to know. I've watched my daughter, your mother, fail you for over 30 years. I've watched your half-sister hurt you while everyone looked away. I tried to tell your mother the truth many times. She refused to listen. She called me senile, dramatic, cruel. So I stopped speaking and started documenting. I can't change your mother. I can't fix Lindsay. But I can give you something no one can take away: this house and the truth. The house is already legally yours. It transferred to you automatically when I passed. But be very careful, Kelly. Lindsay knows about this. She found out when I was dying, and she was furious. I saw something in her eyes that day that frightened me. Watch your back, my darling, and know that I always saw you. I always loved you, even when no one else did. I set the letter down, my vision blurring with tears. Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. There's more you need to know, she said quietly. Things I witnessed, but was too afraid to tell you. Patricia explained what happened 3 years ago when Grandma was in hospice care. Lindsay discovered the transfer on death deed while going through Grandma's papers. She was furious when she realized she wouldn't inherit the house she'd always assumed would be hers. Lindsay confronted Grandma, demanding she change the document. I was in the next room, Patricia said. Eleanor refused. She told Lindsay she'd made her decision years ago and nothing would change it. Lindsay stormed out. I'd never seen her so angry. After Grandma's funeral, Patricia overheard Lindsay on a phone call speaking to someone about ways to contest a transfer on death deed. She said something I'll never forget. She said there has to be a way to prove the old woman wasn't competent, or that Kelly manipulated her, and if all else fails, accidents happen. People become incapacitated. Someone has to manage their affairs. I felt sick. Why didn't you warn me? Patricia's face crumbled. Because your mother destroyed me a long time ago. She took a shaky breath. 35 years ago, I had a fiancé. His name was David, and I loved him more than anything. But your mother didn't approve. She thought he wasn't good enough for our family. So she told our parents a lie that I had done something shameful with another man. The engagement was broken. My reputation was ruined. David married someone else a year later. Patricia wiped her tears. From that day on, I learned that going against your mother meant losing everything. I've been afraid of her my whole life. I'm so sorry, Kelly. I should have been braver. I should have protected you. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not be passive anymore. I contacted an estate lawyer who confirmed the transfer on death deed was legally ironclad. The house had been mine since Grandma's death, and there was virtually no way to contest it now. Then I called Detective Morrison directly. I have new information, I told her, and I want to help build this case. I told her everything about the inheritance, about Lindsay discovering it 3 years ago, about the timing of my accidents coinciding with anything related to that house. Detective Morrison listened without interrupting. We've subpoenaed the restaurant's security footage, she said. Would you be willing to come to the station and view it with us? Victims sometimes notice details investigators miss. An hour later, I sat in a small room at the police station, watching footage from the restaurant's security cameras. What I saw made me physically ill. The video showed Lindsay at the bar before dinner ordering drinks. It showed her glancing around to make sure no one was watching, then slipping something from a small bottle into one glass, my glass, before carrying the drinks to our table. It showed her watching me throughout dinner, waiting as I became increasingly disoriented. It showed the cake incident from an angle the family hadn't seen. Lindsay's deliberate grip on the cake, the calculated aim, the force that was nothing like a playful prank. And after I hit the ground and lay motionless, it showed Lindsay bending down as if to check on me, then a small satisfied smile crossing her face before she rearranged her expression into panic. But the most damning evidence came from Lindsay's phone obtained through a warrant. Forensic analysis recovered deleted files and search history spanning 3 years, how to contest transfer on death deed, proving undue influence on elderly relatives, signs of mental incapacity in adults, how to become legal guardian of adult sibling, sedatives that are hard to detect, dosage needed to cause disorientation without death. Most disturbing was a recovered notes file titled simply K, containing a timeline of every accident I'd experienced with dates, methods, and outcomes. Additionally, investigators discovered Lindsay had been doctor shopping for months to accumulate sedatives, and she'd used a fake ID to purchase some medications. Detective Morrison set down her tablet and looked at me. There's something else. The notes file has a section labeled Future. It contains 3 more planned incidents, each more severe than the last. Your birthday dinner was just phase 1. Phase 2 was scheduled for next month. She paused. And the dosage of sedative in your blood? Combined with your head injury, it could have killed you. Ms. Hughes were upgrading the charges. This wasn't just assault. This was attempted murder. Attempted murder. Those 2 words echoed in my mind for days. My own half-sister had tried to kill me, and she had been planning it for 3 years. Over the following week, the investigation revealed the full architecture of Lindsay's campaign against me. Detective Morrison walked me through the timeline they had constructed from all the evidence. The staircase accident 3 years ago happened exactly 10 days after Grandma's funeral, the same week I received notification of the deed transfer from the estate lawyer. I had been too overwhelmed with grief and work to understand what that document meant. Lindsay, however, understood immediately and acted fast to prevent me from ever claiming what was mine. The parking lot incident a year later happened the same week I casually mentioned wanting to visit Grandma's old house to sort through some memories. Each accident was strategic, designed to build a specific narrative. Kelly is clumsy. Kelly doesn't take care of herself. Kelly can't be trusted to manage property. Kelly needs someone to handle her affairs. The sedative in my drink at the birthday dinner was a dangerous dosage enough to cause severe disorientation, and combined with a serious head injury, potentially fatal. Lindsay had researched exact amounts carefully. Her goal was never simply to hurt me. It was to hurt me just enough to require a legal guardian or to eliminate me permanently if the opportunity presented itself. My birthday dinner was supposed to be the beginning of the end for me. Detective Morrison and the prosecutor requested a meeting with my mother, not as a suspect initially, but as a witness who might have relevant information. I insisted on being present. What emerged in that conference room was more devastating than anything I had imagined. At first, Mom did what she always did. She defended Lindsay. She minimized everything. She deflected every question. But the prosecutor was patient, laying out evidence after evidence until there was nowhere left to hide. The video of Lindsay drugging my drink, the recovered notes file with its chilling timeline, the search history spanning 3 years, the pattern of my untreated injuries documented in medical records, and then something in my mother finally broke. I knew something was wrong with Lindsay since she was a toddler. Her voice was hollow, emptied of all its usual certainty. There were incidents: a neighbor's cat that disappeared, a classmate who had an accident on the playground, a cousin who stopped coming to family gatherings after being alone with Lindsay for 5 minutes. She stared at her hands. Each time I made excuses. I paid vet bills quietly. I convinced other mothers not to make reports. I moved Lindsay to different schools when questions got too uncomfortable. I erased every trace of what she did because I couldn't face what it meant about my own child. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. And I punished you for it. I know I did. I told myself that if I just loved Lindsay more, gave her more attention, she'd become normal. I thought you were strong, Kelly. You were always so independent, so quiet. I told myself you didn't need me the way she did. I sacrificed you trying to save her. A long pause filled the room. And I failed both of you. I created a monster because I was too afraid to see one. Detective Morrison's expression hardened. Mrs. Hughes, we have evidence that you actively discouraged Kelly from seeking medical treatment after multiple injuries over the years. You may have known your daughter was dangerous and did nothing to protect her victim. The prosecutor is considering charges of accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. Mom's face went white. I was just trying to protect my family. You protected the abuser, Detective Morrison said coldly, not the victim. I cooperated with police to coordinate Lindsay's arrest at a family gathering. Sunday dinner at Mom's house. Maximum witnesses, maximum impact, maximum accountability. I wanted everyone who had ever watched Lindsay hurt me and said nothing to see her face real consequences. When Detective Morrison arrived with 2 uniformed officers, Lindsay was in the middle of laughing at something Dan had said. She looked up with confusion that quickly shifted to alarm when she saw the badges. Her mask flickered, and she tried her usual tactics. The tears came immediately, the trembling voice, the wide, innocent eyes. I don't understand what's happening. Kelly, tell them this is a misunderstanding. But this time there was no one to believe her. Mom sat frozen at the head of the table, her face gray with shame. Dan stared at his plate. The cousins and aunts who had come for dinner watched in stunned silence. Detective Morrison read the charges aloud. Attempted murder in the 2nd degree, upgraded due to the dangerous dosage and clear premeditation. Felony poisoning. Identity fraud for the fake ID used to purchase medications. Criminal harassment pattern spanning 3 years. As the handcuffs closed around Lindsay's wrists, her performance collapsed entirely. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. She screamed at me, with 34 years of hatred pouring out in a torrent. This is your fault, everything is always your fault. That house should have been mine. I was the one who visited Grandma. I was the one who was there. You just sat in your corner being pathetic and quiet, and you got everything. I've been cleaning up your existence since we were kids. You're the reason Dad left you ruined this family by being born. Detective Morrison made a note. Lindsay's spontaneous statements, captured on body camera, would be admissible evidence of motive and state of mind. The golden child's own words would help convict her. Later that evening, Patricia came to my house. With Lindsay arrested and the truth finally exposed, my aunt was ready to share everything she had kept hidden. There's something else I never told anyone, she said quietly. When you were 6 years old, I came upstairs during Thanksgiving to call everyone for dinner. I saw Lindsay lead you to the top of the basement stairs. She looked around carefully to make sure no adults were watching. Then she put both hands on your back and pushed with all her strength. My broken arm. I still remembered the cast, the itching the weeks of not being able to write at school. You fell all the way down, Patricia continued, tears streaming down her face. When the adults came running, Lindsay was already crying, saying you tripped, saying she tried to catch you. I told your mother exactly what I saw. She said I was imagining things. She said I was jealous of her family because I didn't have one of my own. She told me if I ever repeated that, I'd never see any of you again. So I stayed quiet for 30 years. Kelly, I'm so sorry. 2 weeks later, Mom learned her fate. While the statute of limitations prevented criminal charges for most historical incidents, the prosecutor filed charges for obstruction of justice. Mom had actively discouraged me from seeking medical care after multiple injuries, which could have provided evidence of ongoing abuse years earlier. But the social consequences were worse than any legal penalty. When the story spread through our community, Mom lost her position on the church board. Neighbors stopped waving. Friends stopped calling. Dan, after 30 years of silent compliance, finally spoke. I love you, but I don't know who you are anymore. They separated 3 months later. After Patricia left that evening, I drove to Grandma's house. My house now. I walked through the empty rooms, touching the walls that Grandma had touched, sitting in the chair where she used to read to me. While cleaning out her old writing desk, I found a hidden compartment behind one of the drawers. Inside was one final envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to my mother in Grandma's handwriting. The postmark was from 31 years ago. Stamped across the front in faded red ink were the words, "Return to sender, refused." I held the envelope up to the light. Through the thin paper, I could read the first line of the letter inside. I need to tell you what really happened the day Michael left and why he was actually running from Lindsay, not Kelly. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the old wax seal and unfolded the yellowed pages inside. Grandma Eleanor's handwriting filled 3 pages. I read her words slowly, each sentence rewriting the story of my entire life. My dear daughter, I'm writing this because you won't let me speak. Every time I try to tell you what really happened, you hang up or walk away. I know you've spent years blaming Kelly for driving Michael away. Here is the truth: Michael left because of Lindsay. When Kelly was 6 months old, Michael came home early and went upstairs. He found Lindsay, barely 3 years old, standing in Kelly's crib with a pillow pressed against the baby's face. Kelly was turning blue. Michael pulled Lindsay away just in time. He told you that night. He begged you to get Lindsay evaluated. You said he was being ridiculous, that toddlers don't understand what they're doing. For the next 4 years, Michael watched and worried. He pleaded with you to get help. You refused. When Kelly was 5, Michael told me he couldn't save Kelly if her own mother wouldn't see the danger. He was a coward for leaving, but Lindsay was the reason he ran, not Kelly, never Kelly. You've punished the wrong daughter for 31 years. I read the letter 3 times. Then I drove to my mother's house and placed it on the kitchen table without a word. Mom picked it up with shaking hands. I watched her face cycle through denial, recognition, and devastating acceptance. When she finished, she looked like she had aged 20 years in minutes. I remember this letter, she whispered. I remember refusing it. I told myself Mother was trying to destroy my family. She looked at me with hollow eyes. I blamed you. Every day I blamed you for your father leaving, and the whole time... She couldn't finish. I didn't help her. You had 31 years to open that letter, I said. You chose the lie because it was easier, and I paid for it every single day. Mom asked what she could do. My answer was firm. You can't make it right, but if you genuinely want to change, start with therapy. Real therapy alone for at least a year. Don't contact me until your therapist says you've made genuine progress, and even then, I might not be ready. I get to decide the timeline now. 3 months after Lindsay's arrest, her trial concluded. The upgraded charges: attempted murder, felony, poisoning, identity fraud, combined with the premeditation documented in her notes, made any plea deal impossible. The prosecutor presented the K file, the security footage, the search history, the pattern of abuse spanning decades. The judge delivered the sentence: 3 to 5 years in state prison for aggravated assault with intent. 5 years probation after release. Mandatory psychiatric treatment during and after incarceration. Complete restitution of all my medical and legal costs. A lifetime restraining order, meaning Lindsay could never contact me or approach Grandma's house. The judge's statement was direct. Ms. Hughes, the evidence reveals calculated predatory behavior toward your sister spanning years. You plan to either kill or permanently incapacitate her to steal her inheritance. This court has no choice but to impose a custodial sentence. As Lindsay was led away in handcuffs, I saw something I had never seen before: real fear in her eyes. The golden child had finally learned that some consequences cannot be bought with tears or manipulated away. The prison doors would not care how pretty she cried. 2 weeks after the trial, I received a letter postmarked from Oregon. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note. Kelly, my daughter, I followed the trial in the news. I know no apology can make up for 31 years of abandonment. I was a coward. I saw the danger, and instead of fighting for you, I ran. Every day since I've lived with shame. I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know I never stopped loving you, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become. If you ever want to talk, my number is below. If you don't, I understand. Your father, Michael. I folded the letter carefully. I didn't know if I would ever call. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But for the first time, I had a choice about my relationship with my father. That was enough for now. 14 months after the birthday that changed everything, I stood in the renovated front room of Grandma Eleanor's Victorian house. The wallpaper was fresh, the floors refinished. The rooms that once held one woman's quiet love now held space for many. The sign outside read, Patricia's House, a resource center for survivors of family abuse. Named for the aunt who finally found courage to speak truth after 30 years of silence. Patricia volunteered here twice a week, helping other women find their voices. She was in therapy herself, working through decades of being silenced. Helping others speak up had become part of her own healing. Women came to Patricia's house to find safety, legal resources, counseling referrals, and something I never had until recently, someone who believed them. 16 months after my birthday, a car pulled up outside. I watched from the window as my mother stepped out carrying a cardboard box. She was thinner now, older looking. The divorce from Dan had been finalized the previous month. She rang the bell. I opened the door, but didn't invite her inside. "I've been in therapy for 14 months, she said quietly. Her voice was different, smaller. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I found more of your grandmother's things. Photo albums, journals. I thought you should have them." I accepted the box. We stood in silence. Mom looked past me at the women moving through the house, finding safety, finding voices they thought they had lost. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Your grandmother would be so proud of what you've built here," she said. She would. We didn't embrace. We didn't cry together. We didn't pretend that 14 months of therapy could erase 31 years of harm. But Mom said, "I'm going to keep going to therapy, for as long as it takes, even if you never want a relationship with me again." And I said, "Good. That's the right reason to do it." For 36 years, I believed I was the problem, the clumsy one, the dramatic one, the daughter who made Dad leave and made Mom love my sister more. It took a cake smashed into my face and an X-ray of old broken bones to finally see the truth. I was never the problem. I was the target. The moment I stopped accepting that role, the moment I opened Grandma's box and chose to fight instead of endure, was the moment I finally started to live. Some people think revenge means making your enemies suffer. But the best revenge is building something they can never destroy. Something that turns your pain into power. That's Grandma's real legacy, and now it's mine too. Thank you for staying with Kelly's story until the very end. This was not just a tale of revenge or family drama. It was a story about recognizing abuse that hides in plain sight, about the courage it takes to break generational silence, and about the power of finally choosing yourself after a lifetime of being told you don't matter. If there is one lesson from Kelly's journey, it is this: your body keeps records, even when your mind is told to forget. Those X-rays revealed what 31 years of gaslighting had tried to bury. The injuries were real, the pattern was real, and most importantly, the pain Kelly felt her entire life was valid, no matter how many times her family told her she was being dramatic. Too many of us were raised to keep quiet for the sake of family peace. We learned to minimize our pain, to question our own memories, to believe the people who hurt us when they said it was just a joke. But silence does not keep peace. Silence keeps abusers comfortable while victims suffer alone. If you recognize yourself in Kelly's story, if you have ever been the scapegoat or the invisible child whose feelings were dismissed, please know that you are not crazy. You are not the problem. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Speaking your truth is not destroying the family. The people who harmed you destroyed the family long before you found the courage to name what they did. It is never too late to choose yourself. Whether you are 36 or 66, you deserve to be seen, believed, and treated with dignity. You deserve relationships where your pain is acknowledged, not minimized. And you deserve to build a life where your past trauma becomes the foundation for helping others. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Sometimes hearing someone else's story gives us permission to acknowledge our own. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories like this. We share new stories every week about courage, justice, and surviving family betrayal. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family who hurt you? Have you discovered that someone you trusted was causing you harm? Your story matters, and sharing it might help another viewer feel less alone. We read every comment, and this community is built on voices finding courage to speak. Thank you for being here, and remember, the best revenge is building a life they can never destroy.